Remedy Entertainment has become a developer known for not playing it safe while innovating. In the early 2000s, Remedy helped change the dynamic of third-person shooters with the first two entries in the Max Payne franchise. Almost a decade after the original Max Payne's success came Alan Wake, another third-person game, but with a horrific twist and minimalist gameplay features that allowed for the story and atmosphere to take precedence. Quantum Break, an Xbox One exclusive, also innovated, but did so in a way that didn't leave gamers necessarily amazed, as the gameplay felt lacking compared to the grandiose narrative moments that could last upwards of 20 minutes. And just like its previous works, Remedy's Control takes gamers in a completely different direction in both gameplay and storytelling, with a woman trying to simply find out what happened to her brother, garnering praise amongst journalists and gamers alike, getting yours truly hyped for another one-of-a-kind experience. The goal of protagonist Jesse Faden is rather simple. Enter the headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Control, the oldest house, to discover what happened to her younger brother Dylan after a moment of altered reality forced the FBC to get involved and take him with them. Jesse's entering the oldest house reveals more than just paranormal activities and a haunting soundtrack, as she immediately discovers the Director of Control murdered, and her being able to use his service weapon, a gun able to not only forego ammo in favor of recharging when not in use, but also can change into various forms, including a fully automatic pistol or even the equivalent of an armor-piercing rifle. Being helped by an unseen entity, Jesse's latent powers such as levitating, and most importantly, being able to launch almost anything not nailed down at various adversaries grow, becoming a necessity to take on the infected FBC employees that have been tainted by the hiss. Both Jesse's weapons and skills can be upgraded thanks to a mix of currency dropped by enemies or found in crates, and skill points, usually rewarded for completing missions both side and main. Though the game sets Jesse in a single building, the environment is larger than one could have expected, even with the promise of an ever-changing building housing mysteries aplenty. After discovering the minuscule amount of story missions, only 10, and side quests, around 20, I set out to complete them all, tackling some of the game's toughest challenges and conquering them after nearly 20 hours, with those optional bosses adding around 3 hours to the overall experience. With an interesting narrative premise and an environment drenched in claustrophobic atmosphere, the most impressive offering from Control is variety in battle. Jesse's service weapon in its original semi-automatic form, being able to melee nearby adversaries, and simply running as much as possible during a firefight, initially feels like enough for Jesse to make it through the various enemies presented at the start. Then Jesse's powers are introduced, with the majority of them being more impressive than the ones beforehand, including the aforementioned launch ability. While most of the abilities are given to the player by completing main missions, some are only associated with side quests, including the helpful shield ability. By the game's end, Jesse will be able to levitate, take possession of enemies once their health reaches low enough levels, and turn the service weapon into a shotgun with the touch of a button. Upgrades and mods are a big part in how well Jesse survives the monumental firefights, especially late in the game. Upgrading weapons and skills also unlock new abilities, such as making the service weapon more powerful, or Jesse's launch ability being able to toss enemies when they're near death. The modifiers that are gained through both successful battles and the completion of board countermeasures, a group of randomized challenges, such as kill 50 hiss without dying, can add boosts to the effectiveness of Jesse's weapons, like better damage and reload speed, while Jesse's physical attributes, such as health and the amount of energy exerted to use her abilities, gain benefits from these mods as well. Depending on certain fights and scenarios, switching up mods or even stacking the same type for double or triple effectiveness is a necessity. Unfortunately, for the fun gameplay comes a lacking of enemy variety. After the first 4 or so main missions, a majority of the opponents Jessie will have to deal with will be unveiled with them being thrown at her at any given moment, including at fast travel control point areas that appear to be a safe zone upon cleansing the section. The enemies range from dumb to overpowered, with the typical grunts wildly missing gunshots, while others are the equivalent of suicide bombers that can knock Jessie's health down to nothing. Levitating projectile throwers, snipers, and even a monster that turns invisible and can unleash a 2-hit kill are hampered by poor AI and death coming from something unexpected, like falling off a ledge. The lacking enemy options is made even worse by the fact the main mission bosses are few and far between, with victory coming relatively easy. The final missions witness the player not taking on some grandiose hiss, but just a plethora of the same enemies seen throughout the game in larger numbers. Thankfully, there are some challenging bosses available via certain side missions. These bosses feel like something from a totally different game, and will produce some of the most stressful yet gratifying moments for any player. It's obvious the developers were worried people would quit if they faced some of the side quest bosses during the main story, considering the game has no difficulty level, and these bosses spike up the difficulty level tenfold. The oldest house and everything making up Jessie's journey is both satisfying and frustrating. Moving throughout the various floors and sections, usually filled with enemies and collectible items, giving players a glimpse into the psyches of employees who once had control of their own bodies. The oldest house changes dramatically, both permanently and temporarily, with the latter usually due to destructive battles that really displays the game's impressive graphics. Certain areas are closed off to the player until Jessie can attain the proper clearance level that comes with the story progressing, gifting dedicated players items and information others just playing through the game lackadaisically won't discover. As captivating as the environment is, getting lost and not knowing how to advance is pretty easy during the first few hours, thanks to a lack of waypoint or indication markers, with the player usually having to rely on direction plaques mounted to certain walls, or hanging overhead. The navigation problem is made worse by the fact the overview map is on a 2D plane that doesn't zoom or rotate, covering the entire screen when pulled up, though in-game time doesn't stop like when utilizing the mission, upgrades, and collectible screen. Loading screens are definitely a problem, as are respawn points, especially in regards to boss battles. A majority of the time upon dying, Jessie will be warped back to the nearest control point that may or may not be anywhere near said boss, featuring a trek back to where the player failed that may involve respawning enemies during that journey. Between life and death is a loading screen that lasts upwards of a minute. And then there's the story. Another example of an exceptional idea hindered by pacing and general execution. The initial premise gives way to a sci-fi experience second to none, with an incredible atmosphere during both playable sections and cutscenes that will leave the player questioning the revelations even after the game ends. Featuring a short main story where the missions are usually built on going from several points while killing enemies before getting an information dump by the few characters giving significant moments, like the memorable scientist Emily Hope and the almost otherworldly janitor Ati. The story's pacing and overall presentation leave something to be desired because of how they use exposition. Even some of the choices, like Jessie's constant inner monologues, can get absurd as she's visibly standing there talking to herself, while the other person just grins and watches. Then there's the fact a lot of the explanation about what happened in the oldest house before Jessie's arrival is connected to collectible notes and audio logs the player must stop playing the game to read or listen to respectively. The stake is somewhat flimsy in comparison to the sizzle because of the design choices in terms of telling without showing. Technical issues are obvious, especially when unpausing the game, as the frame rate drops dramatically, an issue that also occurs during massive firefights. While the physics during combat are wonderful, there's a certain level of unrealistic stiffness during the cutscenes that's reminiscent of last-gen Fallout games. The positives of control, the gameplay, the environment and environmental damage, and meaningful collectibles are worthy of the praise dished out by the gaming community. But Control is heavily flawed, including having terrible pacing and execution in regards to the main narrative, lackluster enemy variation, and some navigational problems. No game is perfect, but very few have been given such high praise without warranting said full recommendation unanimously. There's a lot to enjoy about Control, especially when someone is experiencing the best the game has to offer when engaged in combat. The Oldest House is a magnificent place to journey through, even if the map is generally no help. And the plot is ripe with information just waiting for the player to take in, but only if they search for the truth. For those who enjoy a mix of great action and an unforgettable setting featuring lacking enemy variations, disappointing main boss battles, and a story that tries to exposition players to death, this is a perfect game. For others, it may be too flawed in areas when and where it matters the most, even in regards to one of the game's biggest draw points, of exploring this vast world within New York. But no matter if you want to pay full price or wait for a slight sale, the latter would definitely be for the best. Just remember to always keep watching that refrigerator.
I'm back. I'm coming.
Thank you. Oh, Jesse? The fridge is doing something!
Philip? If I look away, it hurts me. This sounds like the board, but I can't understand it. The fuck?
Did bad on my clairvoyance test.
You can't ace every test, Meg. You see, everyone has different brains. Some brains can talk to each other. We call this ESP.
ESP?
Your exceptions!